So today we have to talk about what the new controller meta will look like, because of course everything has changed with the balance update. So we're going to go map by map and talk about what the new meta will look like on each of the different maps. But first, before we do that, let's just quickly talk about what each of the different controllers is trying to do, what they're meant for, right? And so obviously Viper is our Sentinel controller hybrid. Everyone kind of knows that. That's the role she's been filling for a very long time now, and that will absolutely still be the same for the most part. You very rarely saw Viper as a solo smoke, aside from on specific maps where the other controllers weren't really doing that much anyway, and that will still be mostly the same for Viper, I think, even with the fact she got quite a bit worse. Omen obviously is meant to be more of the initiator kind of controller hybrid with his flash and with getting into weird positions, even a kind of duelist hybrid, you might argue. And that will still be the same. Obviously, they kind of tweaked him to make him a bit better at certain things like that and improved his overall controller ability as well. Brim and Astra obviously were kind of fulfilling a similar sort of niche, and Astra was just doing it better. That's why we kind of didn't see a lot of Brim, I think. And obviously what they've tried to do, the devs, I think, here, is separate those two apart. And so they went, Brim, you're full on fast. Smokes come down quicker. Stim Beacon makes you faster. It's a full execute. He doesn't have rechargeable smokes, so it's going down. We're going fast. In we go, right? That's what Brim is for. Whereas Astra, they kind of pushed in the other extreme, where she was slow before, and now she's even slower because all of the cooldowns are much slower as well. So that's a very, very slow kind of, grind them out, find the information. What are we going to do? We've got plenty of time to think about what we want to do. That is what Astra is going to be all about as well. So they kind of pushed everyone into their own little corners, which I kind of like. I think they did a pretty good job at it overall, and so we'll see how things go. Now, if you had to tell me, which one actually is the best, rank them in order, I'd probably say that Brim is probably going to end up being the best. I think a lot of people seem to already believe that. I do think Viper then will come next, and will still be very viable on certain maps. Omen and Astra, I think it's still up for debate. Astra is very much a kind of unknown. I still aren't quite sure. Astra, honestly, on that list could be anywhere. She could be first, she could be dead last and be the worst agent in the game. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was either of those or anywhere in between. And Omen, I think, is a possible pick on some maps, and it will, again, kind of depend on the rest of the team comp, I think, and we'll get into that as we go forward. But let's start with ASCENT. And ASCENT here, obviously, we know Viper isn't going to be on ASCENT, so it comes down to these three. And you might just think, well, won't it just be Brim, because you just said that Brim is the best? Well, it could be Brim, but as you watch people on ASCENT, the problem with ASCENT, and ASCENT is a very defenders-sided map, the problem can be sometimes that, if you are just going to go for a full execute strategy, you can sometimes get bogged down in these choke points. It's not the easiest to get through the defender's utility on ASCENT. And so often you will see a lot more poking and prodding around in mid and trying to gain some map control and the like on ASCENT, because just full executing onto a site isn't that easy a lot of the time. And so I do still think that Brim will be picked somewhat. Some teams will definitely try it, and we'll have to see. But I'm not too sure that Brim, without rechargeable smokes, will you be able to get enough mid control, for instance, with Brim on this map? I don't know. I think that this is a map where we could definitely see all three of these agents be experimented with, because I do think there is an opening here, even though I agree that Brim is probably going to be the best of them. I think at the top level, that, going that bit slower and taking that bit more map control might be a better idea on this map. Okay, next up we come to Bind, and obviously this was mostly a Viper Astra map, but we did see some Brim in there as well, and I think that this is one where, Astra will be gone, Brim will come in as the main controller that pretty much every team will run, and then Viper might also see some play as well. And I had to go and test this, right, because I had to test whether the traditional Viper setup that pretty much every team uses, which is a wall like this and an orb in there, does it work? Can you actually sneak through here with, both up at the same time? Because this is one where you will need both up at the same time, right? So is it still possible? Can you get there from like this position or over here as well? Is that a possibility? And it turns out it is. You can walk from here with both of these up and get to about just outside of your smoke, and then going from 100 to 0, that is when it will run out. And you can just about do it. And that should be okay if you can get to this point and your team can get to this point and you can walk up there and be here. and then it goes down, that's okay if you can get to this point. And so I do still think that Viper, just for really that reason alone, that you can still run this setup and still manage it, and it'll be okay. For that reason alone, I think you can justify picking Viper. Also, defensively, we need to think about what Viper can do defensively on this map, and obviously a setup that we commonly see is maybe something like that, and the orb here on short. And when you think about like this kind of setup, with the wall here guarding B and your orb guarding A, this is still perfectly viable because it's unlikely that a team is going to, push both of these like at the same time. And so you won't need both up at the same time. You'll only generally need one of them up at one point. And so, that shouldn't be that big of an impact for Viper either. And we have to remember that, Viper still has arguably the best ult in the game. She's still going to be, I think, pretty good in situations where you don't have to put both up and you can have setups where you can just rely on putting one up instead of both. I think that it's possible that Viper will still see play on this map. Okay, moving on to Breeze, and obviously this was a Viper's playground before, and personally, I don't see a way it can be any other way, because just for a start, this wall on A is just too good. Like, you don't really need an orb to go with this wall. This wall on its own will do everything that any other controller wished they could do on this map. This just this wall is better than everything any other controller can do on this map without even an orb, because it's just such a good wall, right? It's so oppressive, really, in what it does, and it's just so important on this map. And I don't see a way how you can get away from it, to be honest. Even if other agents have bigger smokes and maybe they can smoke in here, and I don't know, it's just too awkward. Just use this wall. It has to be better than whatever. And then on B as well, this wall is also pretty fine, and it's going to be better than, having to use like 2 smokes here to smoke off archers and your third one there. Like, that's Brim's 3 gone and he has no more. So once they run out, you're out of smokes, right? You don't necessarily need an orb to just execute on both sides here. Having this orb in mid can be quite nice, and this is a very good orb to learn for Viper. And again, it's one that maybe you don't need both the wall and the orb up at the same time. And so you can, and the same here for like, putting one in the back of the tube here, it's maybe one that you don't necessarily need both up at the same time. And so I do think that it's still possible that, Viper will still definitely be the best agent on this map. And thinking about it defensively as well, often what you'll see is retake walls, right? You'll often see a retake wall for Viper defensively, and so, let's say you're playing B, you put up a retake wall. If your A site falls, you aren't going to need both at the same time, so it shouldn't really impact Viper that much on this map. I do think she's still going to be the prime choice. Okay, moving on to Fracture, and on Fracture we actually saw, some Brim, some Astra, some Viper, sometimes combinations. It was kind of up to the team. There was a lot of different things going around on Fracture. And so what will it become now? Well, I do still think Brim now will become, the favorite pick overall. One thing Brim could struggle with, is if he's defending B, he can't really help A out with smoke. So, and Breach often is the agent that kind of plays in this middle part. That's something that often happens. So defensively, there could be some problems with Brim here on this map, but we'll have to see. Brim might need to become the one that plays in the middle, and Breach might have to just stick to an area, I suppose. But with that said, I do just think Brim, for the attacking side alone, like, this is a pretty easy map to just execute from both sides, and be an execute heavy map. You're already definitely playing Breach as well. And so I do think it will just work with Brim overall, and it makes a lot of sense to play Brim on this map. His ult has some, really good ult spots, like ulting all of tower or something can be very deadly for a defender. Ulting, all of A site can be pretty deadly as well. So I do think it will become a Brim map. I do still think, again, there is some viability for Viper and maybe some for Astra as well, though I think we'll see less of Astra in replacement of Brim. I do think that Viper, again, we saw walls kind of like this one where, you just block off this site, and maybe you put an orb up here in tower, and you think about like the logistics of this again. You can potentially like sneak into these areas around here with just putting the orb up, and then once that orb, you can bring it down, and then just put the wall up as you start to come onto site. You could do things like that, and it might not affect it too much. And defensively as well, you could put up a wall that we commonly saw with something like this, and maybe you put your orb on the other side, right? Maybe you do something like this instead, and you play around with your wall here If your teammates need the orb on A, you can just do that and put your wall down so that they're never, again, using both at the same time. And I do think that this, again, would be a pretty viable setup. Okay, moving on to Haven, and obviously this was an Astra Paradise, but I actually think that this could be, again, one where we see some differences here. I do think that it'll probably be Astra or Brim. Maybe some teams will try Omen. Obviously, we're not expecting Viper here. But the reason for that is I do think you can play a pretty execute-heavy strategy on Haven, and it work out pretty well for you. We see, so for instance, we see Breach on this map, quite a bit. I saw, a team play Breach plus Sky pretty recently. So, it is possible to do something like that. But I also think that it is very possible as well to play very slow and very control-y and play Astra and explore different areas of the map and go for it that way as well. I think that both are possibilities, and it'll basically come down to how good Astra ends up being. Obviously, if people just think that she just doesn't have it anymore and then nerf was too big, then probably we won't see Astra. But I do still think if Astra is at least okay, I think there is still a chance that you would see Astra on this map for that kind of slower map control. And again, if defensively, Brim would probably have to play around B, right? Whereas we normally see Astra on C, and she can just help out the people at A, no problem. Whereas Brim obviously would have to be in this kind of middle of the map so that he could help out both sides. Okay, moving on to ICEBOX, and again, this obviously was a Viper's Playground, and I still don't really see how that would be different. Unfortunately, Valorant here doesn't have the new updated map. I still think it'll be a Viper map. There is some considerations, maybe. Omen can teleport into some neat spots, but you already have Jet and probably Chamber who can do that anyway, so I don't think you need more of that necessarily. I do think that, Brim, Astra, even though their smokes got bigger and obviously a big problem before was they just couldn't smoke like this often, so it was like you could never play them. I do think that it's possible to play them now, but I still don't think it'll be better than just the Viper wall. And again, it comes down to the same thing, that you necessarily don't need both the wall and the orb up at the same time. For instance, you're executing B, you put up the wall for your teammates there, the wall goes down, they've planted the spike, they come back, and eventually, you put this orb up and you just kind of sneak through here, late lurk or whatever like that. Something like that can very easily work. Or the same for A, right? Like you put up the wall here towards screens, and potentially maybe you walk through here first whilst your teammates are kind of grouping up in this area. You put the orb down, you put the wall up as they go in, and that's how it works. I do still think that that's very possible for you to do on this map with Viper, and I still think that that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do on the whole. And I expect that, unless, obviously the map changed a lot, so this one is kind of more up in the air than perhaps the other maps, because the map might be completely different, and we might see, no one runs Sage anymore, and people start running all these different agents that are slightly better. Going through mid becomes a much more of a possibility, which it probably will. But we'll have to see. But I do still expect it to be Viper, but this one obviously is more up in the air. And then finally, we come to Split. And on Split, we saw some Viper, we saw Astra a lot, of course, we saw... Basically, that was it. Actually, no, we saw some Omen as well. Ascend famously played Omen on this map, and I think Omen could see play on this map as well. And generally, the reason why Omen got played, I think, was because he essentially was played in comps where you were playing both Jet and Raze, and didn't necessarily have any flashes, or didn't have enough flashes, some teams thought, in some areas. And so I do think that that is where you might see Omen again. If you do get those double duelist comps and need a flash, you can do some nice flashes with Omen like this or like this. There's plenty of decent places on this map to do flashes with him, so I do think Omen could see some play on this map. With that said, Viper actually is the one I think will miss out on this map, because what you would see defensively from a lot of teams is a setup, something like this, where you put the wall in mid, you put the orb in mid, and you basically say, you're not coming through all this, Viper, you're just not going to, and you put it all up at the same time. And so the fact that you can't really do that anymore, I do think is a big difference on this map, and that we will see less Viper on this map, because that was a key part of why you wanted to play Viper on this map, and now that is kind of gone. So I don't think we'll see as much Viper. Still, I'm sure some teams will experiment, but we'll have to see. And obviously, I think we will see the introduction of more Brim in here. And I do think that, again, like similar to Ascent, that this might be a map where we have to see, where potentially all four could see some play. and teams will just have to figure out exactly potentially what the rest of the comp is doing as well, to figure out which controller suits what they want to do best. And I do think that that is going to be very exciting, right? That we're going to see potentially a lot of different comps based on, whatever they think suits their playstyle best and whatever controller can fit that best as well. We should see quite a bit of difference on split, I expect, as well, which is going to be really quite cool to see. And so those were just some of my thoughts on these maps. I'd love to hear some of your opinions as well of what you think the new meta will be. So leave a comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done, and with that said, have a really nice day.